right, everybody, welcome to the Culture and People cast. Today we have Jez Groom. Jez, in a few sentences, would you tell us who you are and what you do?
Yeah, of course. Well, thanks for having me on the show, first and foremost. Real privilege. And so my name is Jez Groom. I'm the founder and CEO of a behavioral science consultancy. So those of you familiar with like behavioral economics and nudge theory. And we're a team in London, very cross-cultural and diverse team in London, virtually some now. And we solve business problems with behavioral solutions. But we're on a mission, really, which is to make businesses as humanly possible. So I don't think we're ever going to get there, but that's certainly our aspiration, not with every business in the world.
Well, I'm standing with you on that. My whole purpose, I was raised by hippies, if that tells you anything, but my whole purpose is to restore humanity into our work and our workplaces. And I feel like you, it's probably never attainable, but it doesn't mean that it's not a worthy goal.
Yeah. I'm sure there's one business out there that doesn't want to be that human or have humanity in it. But that's okay with me. As long as we get the rest between us, then that's good. That's a good deal, I think.
For sure. So you've been at this work for a while, affecting culture and people. What's your favorite aspect?
I think it's a study of the human condition. You know, that's the fascinating piece for me. And this kind of, I suppose, contradiction that we've got to resolve all the time, that we're becoming better experts at changing behavior, but the human condition is actually one that often doesn't want to change. And I think that's a real challenge, because some of the behaviors that we exhibit just aren't good for us. And if we can redesign the world in a way which makes sense for the way the brain works, then that's going to make the world a better place. And it sounds quite ethereal and maybe lofty as an ambition, but I think it's genuinely true. I think that not enough attention gets paid to the small details in our lives that actually allow us to live more fulfilling lives. And if we can raise the torch and shine a torch in that area, then within businesses, that's the area that we've focused on, where we think we can drive change. That can only be a good thing. So it's thoroughly enjoyable, very fulfilling, and sometimes frustrating and makes you crazy. But that's the drug that is people and humanity.
Yeah. And I think we all feel that way about our work. You and I are definitely in the culture and people space of the influence and the behavior, but I talk to so many people in their careers who are feeling like, I'm in a love-hate relationship with what I do. And I think that's an exaggeration, probably on both ends of the spectrum. And we're all going to feel that way sometimes, right? There's things that are maddening about what I do sometimes, but we love it.
Yeah. And it's the fact that, I think some of the new psychological behavioral economics, behavioral science principles, that actually that they have stayed with us and stuck with us, because in certain sort of contexts and certain domains of our behavior, they work really, really well. Mm-hmm. So, following other people when you're unsure about what to do is a really good strategy most of the time. Yeah. But if everyone around you isn't particularly good at eating properly or exercising well or drinking too much alcohol, then unfortunately our brains think that's a good idea. And we start to look at other people around us and make decisions on that basis. And I think it's just highlighting, like I said, shining a torch on those sorts of, I suppose, instances where maybe some of these sort of hardwired sort of brain decisions can maybe redesigned and actually get people to think a little bit harder about what they're doing, and then design a world that helps them do what is healthy and fulfilling.
Yeah. Jez, what are your thoughts on, I love that you said, following other people when you don't know what to do is typically a good idea. Let's look at that from a systems perspective and people inside organizations, especially related to engagement. I'm hearing a lot from leaders that engagement is a challenge. What are your thoughts related to that?
Yeah. I mean, there's one kind of key sort of tenet, I think, of behavioral science, which is really counterintuitive to most people, and it certainly was to me. I grew up in a very much a persuasion, influence, marketing, media, advertising, PR background. And the models that we subscribe to wholeheartedly, I invested a lot of my time, effort, career to driving awareness and interest. And once we've established that attitudinal shift in somebody's mind, then essentially the desire and action will follow. And that is true for some things. But what you often talk about is a funnel. So actually you can change people's attitudes, but not everybody necessarily will go and follow that action, often to buy a product. It was about 10 years ago that, you have those kind of sort of, I suppose, that dissonance in your mind where you feel and know that actually there's something else, and actually something else might be truer. And it was this moment where, the behavioral scientists started to challenge this notion that attitudes drive behavior, and actually it might work the other way around. So behaviors drive attitudes. And that is very challenging, to think that if you start to do something, then that can inform how you think, is very, very different from thinking about something and then doing something. I find that, especially as you go higher up in the organization with more senior people, I think we have been, I suppose, not indoctrinated, but heavily sort of influenced and biased towards these attitude to behavior models. And what I'd like to see in terms of culture and employee engagement is actually starting to define the behaviors at an everyday level. Some of them relatively mundane, some of them quite small, and then seeing how over time the aggregation on a daily basis and across the piece, that these behaviors start to essentially, I suppose, form the culture, and then attitudes are then formed as a result. So it's a very, very different model. So and it's one that I wholeheartedly believe in. And I think you need both. I don't sit in the behavioral camp which says let's just get the behaviors and let's not give a vision. And because I think most people need to essentially know and have a vision and a culture that they can look to and define. But if you give them behaviors as well, then the two things come together quite beautifully.
Agreed.
I think that's definitely the case.
Yes, I think a lot of people are saying, my culture is in trouble, right? People reach out to me, our culture needs help, or our people aren't performing as they should, right? But they don't understand sort of that atomic habits. I don't know if you read that book, that incremental shifts of focusing on that day-to-day behavior, because I believe culture is the outcome of those behaviors and the way we treat each other at all levels of the organization. And we don't have enough. It's not explicit. It's not, and I don't want us to say like left, right, march, march, march. But I do want us to provide enough direction. And if we say innovation or strategic thinking is really important to our organization, tell them what that looks like. Right?
I mean, this is the thing. It's I was chatting to a friend in a health and wellbeing organization, and she was on a podcast recently talking about that very thought that defining behaviors isn't something that a lot of people have been trained to do. So they can ultimately say what they want, but they can't actually say what are the atomic habits or those small behaviors that are going to get them to what they want. And that's the opportunity for behavioral science. And I think specifically in cultural change, transformation, employee engagement. And so, I love strong values, so when you've got values that aren't just something written on a wall or in an annual report, actually you can feel them within the business. And then when people start to play back some of their behaviors against those values, I think that's a good stepping stone, I think. So starting off maybe with some explicit about actually like the values at Carey, we have ambition, care and integrity. And we've laid out what we think some of those things were. But as our business grows and we have more people, you can see people constantly referring to go, well, as we have a value of care, then I think this is the way that we would approach this. And then that starts to fill the data bank of all of the different ways and the different behaviors that we exhibit care. It's, I think, the definition of behaviors is something that I think we could all get better at.
Yeah. Could we give some tactical suggestions, Jez, that says like if there's a people leader or an individual contributor, it doesn't matter. We all have influence within our organizations. What are some micro behaviors that we could focus on or encourage even inside our organization to get on the right path?
Yeah, I would say that you hit a really, really good point earlier around atomic habits. And I think the first one would, like a principle, if you like, would be to say that to think that you've exhibited one behavior once is enough. I think Wendy Wood wrote an equally good book. Wendy talks about 66 is the average. I think the spectrum's like 14 to 270 in the meta-analysis. But I think the first principle would be that if we are trying to drive some of these micro behaviors, it's with an understanding that it's just going to take some time. And sometimes you might have to be explicit and call them out. And it might feel, a little bit, like I said, left, right, as long as it's not everything throughout the whole day. It's just starting off with a small point. So I would say start small, start regular. So, one of the things that we exhibited, I think, just before we came on the podcast was, feeling of reciprocity. Our brains are really programmed to form social connections around reciprocity. So you very, very kindly reassured me, made me feel at ease, asked me lots of questions about me and where I was. And then I said, and how are you? How are you getting on? Now you could say, like, you're the host, I'm the guest. Why is there a need for that reciprocity? Because actually that contract is kind of signed already. But I think we have, a value of care, and reciprocity sort of sits within that type of toolkit. So taking the time to see how other people are feeling when they ask how you are feeling is something that's quite small. And politeness. I was looking at some politeness quotes recently, which was and some of these things you kind of go, oh God, is that a Facebook post? And it's just, they're on LinkedIn now, and it's just so desperate. But politeness, politeness costs nothing but gains everything. And so I think when you kind of wrap around some less sort of hackneyed sort of phrases and less sort of uber philosophical, and wrap them into, when people ask you things, then respond by asking them things, starts to build those sort of connections. So and you've got to work hard at them. So you can't just do it for a day and think it's gonna work. So I think those are some of the examples. I think there's quite a funny thing that we do. So I'll try and do this quite quickly, and not everything, but we often do an exercise, which is, how do you get the latecomer to a meeting to turn up on time? Often, there's always somebody that that's always late, and they're always late.
Yes.
So we've got a behavioral science toolkit that we kind of play a game and we go through, and some of the things are really sort of common sense, but not common practice. So classic one would be start the meeting on time. So everyone generally waits to get a quorum, but if the meeting starts on time all the time, then people start to know that that's what happens in this organisation. Have an agenda with a time on it, so people know what's going to happen and what time the meeting is due to start. Again, that's not sort of common practice. A really sort of, it was a bit of a naughty one, which was more in the physical space, which is, if people turn up to meetings late, then take one chair away. I don't know how that would work in Zoom. Maybe keep them in the waiting room for 10 minutes.
Yeah, you don't get to let in, I guess.
Yeah, don't be let in for 10 minutes. So these are like really small things. And actually, as I've said, those 2 or 3 things, that if you're always late, but you got to a position where every meeting on agenda, everything had a time to start date on it, the time of the meeting actually started at that time, and actually you'd be excluded from it. It wouldn't change literally within days. Having like 18 occurrences of that wouldn't be a nice experience for the brain, and it would start to say, actually, and the interesting thing, and this is this sort of final on that, is it's not the fault of that person. So what often happens is that meetings often go longer than intended. Less so now, actually, with Zoom calls, because actually I think people find it a lot easier to say, I'm leaving. You can wave like this and press leave. So the awkwardness of actually physically leaving the room is taken away.
Tripping over someone's chair, or
all of this. And but finishing meetings on time. So if you're going to start on time, finish on time. And like I said, these are small micro behaviors that actually establish culture, which is this. It doesn't mean this is what it's not saying. I think it's critical is this is a culture which doesn't tolerate lateness. It's not that. It's actually, this is a culture that runs things well, with some rules that everybody's aware of, and
it respects each other's time.
Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah, because generally everybody knows that the person that is late to meetings and makes meetings drag on is the most senior person.
Yeah.
And that is again a hierarchical challenge that it's always, if you're a junior person in a meeting, it's quite hard to run by 5 minutes, I'm going to go.
Yes.
But again, you know, having a culture that encourages that.
Yeah.
Actually, I've got another meeting that I don't want to be late for.
I know.
So I think, you know, that's a classic example we use a lot because everybody experiences it.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Agreed. And I think it's a timely one too, Jez. And so in order to respect your time, because you and I chatted so much at the beginning, we've got 2 more questions, but I'm going to include those in the show notes anyway. So you and I will talk about those in an email, and we'll make sure those are in the show notes. So guys, here's what we're going to share. We're going to share some people that you should be following that Jez respects in the culture and people space, and also some favorite resources of yours in the show notes. So be sure to check those out. But in the meantime, Jez, I just thank you for being a guest. Thank you for all you do for culture and people.
No, thank you so much for asking on the program, and good luck, everyone. You know, it's a big old world out there, but there's lots of work to be done. And yeah, there's always going to be one business that doesn't want to be human and have humanity in it, but let's try and crack the rest of them.
Agreed. Peace and progress, guys.